This is Chapter 4 of The Judgement by Terry Daniels. If you haven't heard this story from the beginning, please return to the YouTube channel and listen to the chapters there. Please like and subscribe. If you'd like to continue, please bear in mind that this book contains language and scenes of violence that some may find offensive. The Judgement by Terry Daniels. Chapter 4. The Courtroom. The room remained silent for a moment as the judge continued making notes on the pad in front of him. Taking his glasses off momentarily, he looked over to the lawyer. "Anything more to add here, Mr. Connor?" "A few loose ends to tidy up on this event, Your Honour." Connor looked over to his colleague and was met with an approving nod. "The police report at the time is very helpful here." He pulled out a piece of A4 from his file to reference from. "It states all the men involved, including the boy's father, John Dargett, had been drinking heavily all day and that some gambling had occurred with a game of cards. This had got rowdier as the day went on and into the early evening. Debts had started to mount up on the deceased's side, as he was clearly being conned by the other two men who, it was discovered later, were cousins. A dispute then occurred over payment. Mr. Dargett refused to pay and, being highly intoxicated, began to threaten the other two. Verbal abuse was being shouted on both sides. He then rose from the card table, kicking over the cards and drinks, and proclaimed he was returning back to his caravan." Connor saw the judge raise his eyebrows a touch, but continued. "This was witnessed by several people, as it was near the main bar area of the social club. The two men also got up from the table and began to follow him out. A further argument was heard outside, and another pair of witnesses, a young couple having a quick kiss and cuddle, reported seeing Mr. Dargett try to swing a punch at the larger of the two men. His swing completely missed, but he was rewarded with a swift, light punch on the face. More swearing and profanities ensued, and Mr. Dargett, now sporting a bleeding nose, turned and headed back swiftly to his caravan on the perimeter. He was still throwing insults and making vulgar hand gestures as he walked away. The rest of the sorry tale you now know." "A regrettable incident indeed," replied the judge. "So what happened afterwards? Anything this court should know concerning the boy?" Indeed there was. Connor once again referred to another sheet of paper. "If I may?" he asked, pointing to the sheet. "Of course. Please continue." "The beating was enough to cause the father to die at the scene. At the court case of the two men responsible for his death, a verdict of manslaughter and a suspended sentence was given, owing to the fact that Mr. Dargett was seen taking the first swing. Edward's mother did not attend the court due to stress, and only a few witnesses came forward from the surrounding caravans that night. It transpires that the two cousins were part of a major crime ring, and many guests in those caravans that night were warned off." "And the boy?" "I was coming to that, Your Honour. There were many repercussions from this tragedy. Mrs. Dargett was signed off work indefinitely and turned to alcohol for comfort. Edward was so traumatised that for the first 6 months after the death he refused to talk. Despite specialist attention at the time, I'm afraid the 1970s were still basic with virtually no counselling to speak of. He also began to wet the bed on a regular basis. It did finally come to light when he began to speak again that he blamed himself for the incident on the belief that one of the men was the father of his holiday friend Barry, and the punch in the nose had only been the start of it. This is obviously untrue, and it took many months to convince the child that it wasn't the case." Connor then pulled out one final piece of paper. "Just one more thing. It was decided that a change of school was needed for Edward to settle down. His mother also suffered with financial matters, as no compensation was issued after the harrowing court case. They started to cut down on heating and food and make ends meet. There were no more holidays and no permanent father figure, as the boy entered his 10th year. "Thank you, Mr. Connor. You have been very thorough." The judge looked to his left and right for acknowledgement. "We have no further questions at the bench. Is there anything to add from the other side?" The courtroom remained silent, and the judge, satisfied, nodded to himself. "Very well. Let us move on." Connor looked over to his colleague. "Mr. Lewis," he asked, "if you would like to take the second witness." Lewis motioned to him and rose from his chair, causing a light squeak from the legs. He knew that the two of them had already previously discussed this, and he made his way to the back of the room and wheeled back a stand with a television screen. He positioned this at an angle in full view of Connor and of the waiting bench. Reaching down to the shelf, he took hold of a remote control. With a carefree press of the small red button, the screen ignited into life. What filled it was the image of a young boy seated very quietly on a plain metal-framed chair. The room pictured on the screen itself was white-walled, but there were a few prints of classic paintings hung here and there, framed and trying in desperation to cheer everything up. The boy was sat quietly with his hands under his legs and was quite scruffily dressed in a t-shirt, pale blue jumper and black trousers. His hair was jet black and quite unkempt. As he waited, he looked from side to side, but seemed oblivious at the fact that a camera was filming him. His left knee shook slightly as if nervous. Mr. Lewis grunted to himself that the picture was clear, and raising his head, looked directly at the judge. "Your Honour," he said clearly, attracting everyone's attention, "if you would like to look at the video screen." He gestured at the television with an almost sarcastic movement. "The next witness is a young male, and due to his tender years, is not permitted to attend this court in person by law. We have, with your approval, set up a video link, and both sides have come to an agreement on the questions with which to ask the child." The judge looked to the other table at Connor. "Am I correct," asked the judge, looking directly at him, "that this agreement has been reached by both sides?" "You are, sir," replied Connor. "Very well. Let us waste no more time. We all know how this works, gentlemen." "Hopefully, then," said Lewis, returning back to the screen, "I can hand over the next stage to our interviewer, who is sitting with the boy." With that, he pressed another small button on his remote control. The sound of a clearing throat was heard, and a female voice projected from the speaker of the screen. It seemed a gentle, caring tone. "Good morning, everyone," the voice said. "Hopefully I can trust everyone can hear me okay, and I'm sure Mr. Lewis will let me know otherwise via his remote. My name is Jenny Sanders, and I am here sitting opposite Edward." There was a short pause as a flicker of recognition appeared on the boy's face. The voice of Jenny tittered slightly. "I'm informed that in a conversation earlier today he would rather be known as Eddie. Isn't that right, Eddie?" All of the court watched as the boy raised his head slightly and mumbled some words incoherently. "I'm sorry, Eddie, but for the purpose of this video, you need to speak up. If you remember, we talked about this earlier." His face showed complete concentration, and this time he answered a lot more clearly. "Okay," he said. That's better. Thank you, Eddie," replied Jenny. "So, can you tell everyone how old you are?" 13, replied the boy. All the time his face looked at the off-centre of the image, almost behind the camera. Jenny was obviously seated there, although out of view. "And have you come with your mother today?" "Yes," came his reply. "And where is your mother at the moment?" "She's with a lady in the next room." "So I can ask you a few questions on our own, without Mummy in the room?" "Yes, but—" His facial muscles grew stern. "She's my mother, not Mummy. I'm not a baby, Jenny." The woman's voice emitted a small, embarrassed cough before she spoke again. "I'm sorry, Eddie. I won't say that again. Now remember that this is especially important today to tell the truth to me, as you won't be in any trouble, even though you may feel a little sad in answering them. Is that okay?" "Yes," The boy seemed tense, so Jenny decided to relax him a little at first, and her tone softened. "Are you still enjoying school at the moment? What's your favourite subject?" "I like history, about war and guns and stuff." "Do you enjoy going to school?" "It's brilliant, but I worry about my mum when I'm not at home." "Why is that?" Eddie suddenly froze slightly and looked again beyond the camera. "It's all right," said Jenny reassuringly. "I promise that you won't get you or your mum in trouble, okay?" On hearing this, Eddie nodded his head and seemed to relax again. "It's just that Mum gets depressed quite a lot since Dad died. I hurry back from school as I don't know if she's been okay. I want to cook our tea when she's awake." "Do you cook tea most nights, Eddie?" "Apart from Saturday, when I go down to the chip shop. We have battered sausage and chips each. It's my favourite meal of all time. The lady in the chippy always gives me a bag of the crispy bits from the cooking oil and doesn't charge me any extra. After that, I walk to the other shop where I get my Coke and—" Again, Eddie paused and looked uncomfortable. His hands slid from under his thighs and he started to rub them together almost mechanically. I don't know if I'm allowed to say." Jenny's voice again sounded calm and smooth in reply. "As I said, it's all right to tell me everything. I get Mum some bottles too." "Are they alcoholic bottles?" Eddie nodded. She gives me a note, a kind of shopping list, I suppose you'd call it. She's written which brands of vodka she wants. I kind of know which one it is anyway, because it's always the cheapest. Mum tells me she wants to save money as we haven't got much, and she feels guilty about my lunch, but that's okay. Mr. Williams knows what she wants, and I normally don't have to bother with the list." "Does he always let you have the vodka, Eddie?" "I don't want to get Mr. Williams in trouble. I know he's not supposed to sell me the stuff, but I would never drink any. I tried some once after Mum had fallen asleep on the sofa after Coronation Street. It was horrible. It felt as if my mouth was burning. I hated it." Eddie's face crumpled in repulsion as he remembered the night. "I also hate my mum drinking all the time, especially after what happened to Dad. I wish she would stop, but she tells me it helps her from feeling sad. It doesn't, though. She just cries for a bit and then falls asleep." There was silence for a moment on the camera, and the courtroom also remained quiet. Only the buzz of the artificial lights could be heard. The voice of Jenny was heard once again. "What do you normally have for tea, Eddie?" "Beans on toast, burgers and mash too. The potato is a powder, so I only have to add hot water. That's one of my favourites. Not as good as a chippy tea, though. That's my all-time." There was a slight humph of a reassuring noise from Jenny and a scratching of the pen on paper. "What's life like at home, Eddie?"